Well, thanks to the three of you for joining me today for our second installment of In Conversation. And I've been particularly excited about this one and to introduce these three dear friends and colleagues to the In Conversation series. I want to introduce first Christy Gast. All three are from the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. Christy teaches fifth grade in East Grand Rapids, Michigan. Bridget Reith used to teach fifth grade in Christy's classroom in Grand Rapids and now directs an initiative that we will tell you about in West Michigan called the Ignite Engagement Initiative. And Sherry Kilpatrick teaches fourth grade in Sparta, Michigan, and has, however, at earlier stages in her life, taught littles. So we're excited to have kind of a range of different areas of expertise. And by way of introduction, I want to harken back to the conversation that I had with Tom Newkirk, my dear friend and colleague, my editor, in our last In Conversation, where we began to explore some of the ideas in my 2018 book called Engaging Children. I mentioned then that I am rewriting that book now for a second edition and an audio book that will highlight the principles of helping kids engage independently and to recognize independently when they're not engaged. But in this new context of the post-COVID world and some of the concerns that I think we all have about children's overall well-being. How are the kids? And I think all of us, no matter what demographic, no matter what area of the country, we're struggling, in my experience, with kids. I hate the way that they're referred to sometimes as behaviors. These are the kids that have behaviors. Well, no, these are not. These are children who are not, to some degree, experiencing well-being. So my interest, as you know from the first podcast, is really in imagining how using principles of engagement, how classroom teachers can respond in a more efficacious way to some of these needs. I've said before in a couple of blogs, I will say again, we are not trained as social workers and psychologists, nor should we act as if we are. And I worry about even some of the great work that's been done in social and emotional learning. It's very, very difficult to differentiate child by child a lot of the social and emotional programs or processes or approaches, when really what it comes down to is what are the needs of this child on this day in the overall classroom setting, the ecosystem of the school in a way. So I think it's pretty tough to tailor social and emotional responses. A program, just like any literacy program, can't really do it. We really have to be aware of each child's needs, which, anyone viewing this will know, but I feel like I need to get that out. So I'm going to start just exploring some questions with Bridget. I'll start with Bridget first, and then we'll kind of go around. But we're just for our viewing audience, we're going to interrupt each other a little bit. We're going to talk as more of a conversation. But I'd like Bridget to get us started with giving a little bit of background on the Ignite Engagement Initiative in West Michigan and kind of what we've been working on the past, what is it, 6 or 7 years maybe, of just trying to really push in on kids' engagement and their propensity to be engaged and stay engaged. So Bridget, could you give us just a little background on that?
Sure. Thank you, Ellen. This is year 6, actually, with the program. I constantly
Wow.
have to,
Yeah.
a little bit of finger math there to reassure that that's what it is. Because honestly, it feels like it's been longer, doesn't it, Sherry and Christy?
Yeah.
I feel like I've been doing this for a very long time, and I mean that in the best possible sense.
Yeah.
In 2019, in the spring of 2019, Christy and myself and another colleague attended the Michigan Reading Conference, and Ellen was a keynote speaker, and she was talking about her latest published book, which was called Engaging Children. And we sat there and we took notes and we looked at each other and went, oh my gosh, just oh my gosh. And then we learned not too long after that that a program was being created around this by a force of nature named Diane Teich, who was previously a literacy coach at Kent ISD. And she had embraced the ideas in engaging children, saw the power of what Ellen had put together, and wanted to create some motion around it. And so Christy and myself and the colleague that we had been at, along with another group of local professionals, including Sherry, were in this inaugural cohort of the Ignite Engagement program, focused very specifically on taking a look at Ignite Engagement. And so if you paid attention to the date that I said at the beginning of this, that was 2019. And so in spring of 2020, things changed for all of us. And we had been coming together on a monthly basis. After school, we were getting together for full PD days, with Ellen coming in and doing demonstration lessons in people's classrooms and having the opportunity to really learn and process and share with each other the techniques and strategies that we were using successfully and unsuccessfully. And then in spring, we were able to stare at each other through Zoom and support one another through this very difficult time. So it was, it has, for me, as a teacher at that time, I think Ignite Engagement not only moved my teaching, even after 15 plus years in the classroom, but it also really became this support, and not just because of COVID, but that certainly amplified it, of a group of professionals who were all on about the same business. They were teaching in different contexts. They had different expectations of them, but we were coming together in a way where we knew what our goal was, and that was to increase student engagement, to increase the success rate of our kiddos. And well-being came very much to the forefront in that next year or two. So Ellen, is that kind of what you were thinking about?
It is, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Bridget, your point of view is really interesting, because you were, as you've said, a teacher, and fifth grade teacher at the time, in the inaugural cohort, and now you're directing the overall sort of process, and it's changed and developed over the years, as good projects do. And I'm curious, Bridget, if just a general idea about what you saw with your fifth graders after you started to kind of push in and think about being more explicit, more transparent about engagement. What were some of the just global observations that you had?
Really big underlying piece that I walked away from after reading the book, before even trying any of this in the classroom. I think this must have been probably late spring or early summer of that year, Christy, when you and I had gone in. MRA is usually around March. So after that, we got a hold of the book and read the book. And I thought, okay, this is about, I am not the director of engagement. I am not the one who is the engager of these students. They are the ones, and they have to understand it, and they have to be able to recognize and be able to re-engage and disengage, and all of the things that as successful adults we are able to do. But we have to be very explicit, showing them and teaching them about that. And that to me was just like, where has this been all my life? So taking that in and then being able to watch some of that demonstration work really put me in mind of what I'm trying for is independent, agentive learners. And I think that the largest thing that happened as a result in my own classroom was for me to be able to really, let go of what needed to be let go of, and put the students in the position where they were learning how to take over their own learning. And they were just, it was small things, it was large things. So I definitely, I was, even after 15 plus years of teaching, I still was guilty of the little ducks all in a row lined up to try to get help with something. And within that year, I started looking around and going, wow, this doesn't work. This isn't good. And learning some techniques about how to dissolve that line, and how to present some scaffolds and frameworks within our classroom that unavailable. It just didn't need to be mostly me. So that working toward student independence.
And
What
Bridget, you're freezing a little bit, and I think our internet signal is a little wonky there. But
is
just to restate, I think engaged kids,
the
academically,
seeking?
emotionally engaged kids, are kids who experience a greater sense of well-being, which is, of course, what we're trying to go for in the first place. I mean, again, we can try social and emotional projects and programs, approaches, but real academic engagement is what we are, after all, responsible for. And I think we've often, to your point, Bridget, looked at engagement as something outside or beyond the child, right? That it's something that we were responsible for doing. I know I felt like that in my classroom. I felt like I was in the circus, twisting the plates and keeping them spinning all the time. And it's just, it was a big aha when, I realized, wait, who's doing the heavy lifting here? And that's really where where I started to begin that transition. So Christy, would you mind talking to us a little bit? You were in fourth grade when we started, you're in fifth grade now. Would you mind giving us just a little bit of insight, or, a little picture into how you started with your kids when we were, saying, all right, let's push in, let's get started, let's be explicit about engagement. Where did you start and what did you notice?
It's interesting. Where I started and where I am right now is very different because it changes every year. It's never the same. So it's interesting. I think about, like Bridget had said previously, this whole thing about it's not me, it's allowing them to really take some ownership. And when kids have ownership, their well-being is going to be better. And sometimes kids have a hard time coming up with that ownership. So for me, my very first place in starting was really looking at my classroom and how I could just change it from an environment of just having like desks. I know that sounds crazy, but
No,
looking
it
at
doesn't.
tables and flexible seating and
Mhm.
where else in this world do we just sit at a desk unless, all day long? And why do we have to have a pass, to go out except for safety reasons? I mean, they're just things I think that are important.
Yeah,
We need to trust kids. And I think that's really important. When we
that's
trust kids, their well-being, they believe in what they can do too, because you believe in them.
yeah, beautiful.
So,
That, I
and
mean,
it's very
it
different.
does come down to trust, doesn't it?
It
Mhm.
absolutely does. So those were the very beginning parts, and I was intentionally teaching. And now it does definitely look different as far as engagement. I think our population has changed, partly because of COVID. But that, I really started in intentionally teaching those pillars, and it has broadened. And every year it is going to look different, and I start it differently. I will say the getting to know your class things that I used to do. I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but I know some of you have been there too.
We all did it.
Not. I mean, they all know each other. Who's that for? That's for me.
Exactly, exactly.
So
Yeah,
guess what? I've changed that. It's more of looking at how are we going to be learners in this classroom? How can we engage ourselves looking at the pillars? How do you want this classroom set up? What sorts of jobs are important? What makes you feel safe in here? That in itself is
yeah,
going to produce an engaging
yeah,
classroom.
yeah.
And it changes every year for
Yeah.
how that group is. So
I think it's so important that you point out that differentiation because, we are, obviously the four of us are very interested in literacy. That's the primary context in which we've been applying the engagement principles, although they apply straight across the curriculum spectrum. But I think that the differentiation that you are talking about, Christy, that we value so much, is, I'll call it, threatened right now, particularly in literacy education in this country. It's everybody do the same thing every day. And one of the central tenets of engagement is choice, right? I mean, we know that
yeah.
kids with choice and kids who are trusted by the adults in their classroom thrive. So it's almost now that we're kind of swimming upstream a little bit, and in just in terms of policy and practice questions across the country. And I think this, again, you mentioned teaching the pillars of engagement, which I've mentioned in my most recent blogs, but that are enumerated in the book, it is really a way of kind of taking that back and saying, look, we cannot have a one size fits all approach here, either socially and emotionally or academically. Obviously, we got to have trust, we have to have choice, and we have to have explicit conversation about engagement when we experience it, when they experience it, and what happens when we and they sort of fall out of a period of engagement, right? So I appreciate that so much, Christy. Sherry, I'd love to turn to you too, and either Christy, Sherry, Bridget, if you you think about any individual kiddos who have who have seemed to benefit from an explicit introduction and discussion about engagement. And also, Sherry, when I think about choice, as we were just talking about, I think of you every time because you have done such an extraordinary job in your classroom of offering kids choice and trusting them. So I'm just curious, what are some of the specific experiences you've had, Sherry, that you look back on and say, that worked. That was gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Yeah, I've had quite a few actually in the 6 years since we've started. Again, it changed the way that I teach, kind of, and I've taught for several years, several years. And I can think of things right off the bat. I know that year we came back from COVID, 20 to 21, we had kids in and out all day, all year. And the administrators were expecting us to just take it up like normal. The year before it was, oh, we can, have all this social emotional part. And then the next year it was kind of gone. And that wasn't the case for the kids. And once I started teaching engagement explicitly, and we talked about it as a class, we got to our nonfiction writing unit, and I had a group of kids. I had a couple of girls that were really interested in saving animals. And so they had choices of, what to explore and research. And they came up with some great places, some websites. I think a lot of it is, like Christy said, trusting the kids, but it's giving up your control, which is super hard for us teachers. That we all know that. Yeah. And it is giving that up, and it's a little scary, but it is helpful to have administrators that support you, and you kind of at some point just say, let's give it a shot, let's try it, and gave it to the kids and let them get into their computers, of course, talking ahead of time about what is expectations and what should you be on and not on. And they just went nuts. I mean, they just went crazy. And I let them in my room. They kind of traveled down a little rabbit hole, and I let them to kind of see where it goes. And they ended up wanting to earn money to give it to, it ended up being the Wild, or the—
I remember this.
Yeah, it was the World Federation place and the Four Ocean place, and they started making bracelets. I had kids making rocks, like they had rocks and they wanted to paint them. They made booths, and this was all their idea. They stayed all their idea.
That's the key.
It was
yeah,
all
in a million years, would you have ever said, I know, let's go paint some rocks? You never would have said that, right? No, it was them.
I just kind of helped facilitate, but they came up with it all on their own. We wrote a letter to the principal asking if we could sell them, and he said yes. And they raised all this money and donated it to the WWF and to the Four Ocean, and all the kids got a little cup and got to pick up. The Four Ocean is to pick up trash. Each dollar is £1. So they did that, and it was just the coolest thing. And was that in our curriculum? No, but I felt like they believed in themselves, and kids who normally didn't get involved. I mean, they were making booths at their house. I had parents come in with this big wooden booth, and I mean, it was just awesome to see them feel so worthwhile,
Yeah. And it's what stands out to me, Sherry, as you talk, is that it's so purposeful. right? I mean, it's so driven by not your purpose, their purpose. And I would argue that there is a whole lot of curriculum in what they were doing. Think of our speaking and listening objectives that nobody ever really talks about. Think of the research objectives that are in Common Core state standards and in most state standards. They were doing a lot of it. It just looked different, didn't it? Because they were driving it and you were not. You were there, you guide on the side, right? But they were driving it, and the energy that comes from that it's palpable when you walk into all of these colleagues' classrooms. It's an energy that I think helps kids move past in a very real way some of the very troubling things that they're dealing with. It's engaged kids are rarely, kids who are disrupting in some other way, right? So I think our lack of choice in American schools are feeling like we are prescribed to follow these very rigid curricula. Um, it's working against our overall objectives, not just social emotional objectives, actual learning objectives. Because when you're engaged, you remember and reapply. And when you're not engaged, I mean, it's just about this simple in the research. When you're not engaged, you don't remember and reapply. So what do we really care about here? Sherry, just one follow-up question. You did teach littles. Kinder? Were you in kinder? Am I remembering that?
I did T1, which was a transitional first. So in between kindergarten and first grade.
Yeah.
And I taught first grade.
Did you ever, I know you haven't been teaching littles while we've been involved in our work together, but have you ever sort of imagined, gosh, what would this look like in a kinder or first grade classroom or second?
Yeah. And we've actually seen it kind of when you have come into some different classrooms. We've seen the littles, it's such a new experience for them to write and to read. It's so exciting. You give them lots of choice, and I think you can even teach the littles all those words. I think that pictures help them a lot. Yeah, pictures help them a lot, but finding those experiences, those solid experiences, and having them write about it. I had some kids write, back in the day, some very cute stories and draw pictures to go with it. But I could see them, getting the big books out and exploring something that they're interested in, and looking through. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't been in the room since we've had, iPads and things like that with the littles, but, they watch videos all the time, and to be able to, help direct them to watch videos and gain information and then talk with their peers. Because a lot of times we picture reading as just sitting quietly. And right. Huge learning for me that I sit down with my kids and we'll explore something and research and look it up and learn about it. And I asked them, I said, did you know we just did reading? And they're like, what? So really giving them a new definition of what this looks like. And littles can do that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when Sherry's talking about the language that we're teaching kids, she's referring to the language around the pillars of engagement that Christy mentioned a little while ago, that the academic, sort of the ferocious academic learning, I have to know more, very much like Sherry was just describing with her girls a couple of years ago, an emotional connection, a sort of, how does this impact me at the heart level and not just the mind level. The idea of changing opinions and beliefs, which we call perspective bending, which actually young kids are very, very good at and get really engaged over this idea of thinking differently because someone else has a different point of view or perspective or life experiences. And then finally, the aesthetic experience, which is how do kids find beauty in their world? And beauty, much like the rest of what we're talking about today, has a very different meaning. The aesthetic world has a very different meaning than what we maybe grew up thinking. And it's very, very applicable to kids' experiences. And so that's, I think that language that we have used And that, in schools like yours, the consistency in that language, Bridget, I'm thinking of our kindergarten friends at, that we've been working with this year, all the way through Christy's kids. I mean, it's a consistent language. Think about Jenna's classroom and those littles, all the way through upper grades. When they've had that experience, right? It is that you can build on it each year. Bridget, I'm wondering what you noticed with that kind of accumulation of experience.
Yeah, I think like anything, there's that, am I comfortable with this language? Am I using this in a way where I have facility with it that I can be descriptive of my own experience? And you do see that build. I just recently did a data collection series where I sat with kindergartners and first graders within our program, and you can tell what the teacher has brought into the classroom already. And so those terms that you were just saying, I would say, I'm going to say some fancy words, and then I'll tell you what they mean, and you can tell me if you've had a time like that. And so maybe they hadn't talked yet about a couple of the pillars, but when I said one that they knew, they were all like, oh yeah, intellectual urgency. I have felt that. Like, we got that. That happens to me, yesterday, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So you definitely see that embracing of it. And then, like you said, on through the grades with the example that you're giving is a lab school example where multiple teachers within the building have had this have done this work together. And so by the time they do get to Christy, not every single student has been necessarily within a classroom every grade level, but most of them have had some form of exposure to it. And so
Christy, which lets Christy go crazy, right? You get to really dig in.
Well, it's definitely different from my first year because you aren't, I'm still explicitly teaching what the strategies and skills that I want through engagement, but it's at a different level. I don't have to, give the vocabulary necessarily because they are very familiar and they know. And they'll say, but my interest is basketball, but I wrote about basketball in third grade. Okay, so think about one of the pillars, for instance, maybe perspective building as we are doing argument writing and reading. What possibly could come up? And just a couple of years ago, I remember this person was so basketball driven and ended up writing, then came to the fruition of, I'm going to write about should girls should females and males be paid the same amount if you're in a professional. And I was like, there you go.
Gorgeous.
And it's taking it somewhere differently. And that child came up with it on their own. It's not repeating the same thing. It's taking it to a different level and allowing that thinking and that choice, as we've talked about, to occur while still meeting the state standards. So it's pretty phenomenal.
I mean, I think, let me underscore that, while still meeting the state standards, because obviously in all of your experience around West Michigan, nobody's ignoring the standards. We are still subject to the same assessments as everybody else is. Bridget, speaking of data, and we've just got a couple seconds left, but you've reviewed now a lot of data from the Ignite Engagement initiative. What are you seeing, generally speaking, in terms of growth over time?
Yeah, and I know our time is short, so I kind of want to encapsulate it this way. If you take a look at those, we collect data in two ways. One are student perception surveys. My mistake, three ways. We also collect student achievement data based on whatever tool that the particular school and district uses. And then we also collect teacher growth data, which is sort of a conversation with the coach and tracking where we begin the year and where we end up in May or June. And we continually see positive scores. We continually see that students in treatment classrooms or cohort classrooms are making those progress goals at a rate higher than those not in. And to the extent of Michigan actually took on the program itself, Ignite Engagement, as one of their promising practices. And so one of the initiatives of the MDE was to
Michigan Department of Education.
A group of strategies. Yeah, thank you, the Michigan Department of Education, to curate some strategies to put out there, some programs, some ways of thinking, and there's some pretty stringent guidelines to be able to get on that list. And the program,
Yeah.
which is based around this thinking that engagement is important. As a matter of fact, it's the foundation of all learning and student experience and well-being. So we
Yeah.
were very proud to be
That's
named
it. Yeah. And
something
that is, it's
successful.
so important because, you know, we need to tell the story of these successes, and they are not the sort of traditional kinds of approaches into academic achievement. As a matter of fact, they're better, may I say that, than, you know, than our sort of, you know, the curriculum programs that we've followed. But by way of concluding, I guess I want to say a couple of things that you three are probably too humble to say, which is that you all have made this work in a context of prescribed curriculum. Sherry, I remember when we started at in Sparta, we were working with AR. Every book in the library was leveled. I mean, there were some very tight constraints around all of you, very much like many of our colleagues are experiencing around the country, but you found a way. And that did have to do with helpful leadership. And we've also seen, Bridget and I have seen this working in schools and contexts where the leadership is, let's say it this way, more focused on other things, not as supportive, shall we say. And I think that for many of our colleagues, sadly, we're in a position of having to make some of these decisions about promising practices on our own in our own classrooms. Fortunately, you three have not had to experience that. But there are successes, clear successes in teaching engagement explicitly in schools where that administrative support is not as present, and where the, you know, again, curriculum mandates and so on are very much in place. So I think it is, engaging children is not a new curriculum. It is not a new thing that we have to implement with fidelity. You know, it's not that. It's something that I've seen all three of you weave into your daily practices in conversations and conferences with kids when you're providing instruction in other disciplines. It's not a new thing to implement. It's remembering, right, to talk about engagement with our kids, even in tiny fragments, a couple of minutes. Oh my gosh, I saw you were so excited about saving endangered animals and contributing to the World Wildlife Fund. You know, that is the kind of thing that great readers do. Here's some nonfiction tips for when you're reading on, you know, on a website or whatever. I mean, it gets woven in, doesn't it? And I think the power and the results that Bridget's describing really speak for themselves. So I could not be more honored to work with the three of you. I consider myself the luckiest girl in the world because of the work I get to do. But chief among that is the incredible colleagues that I have and who have also become dear friends. So it's a lovely, lovely experience that we've gotten to have together, and we're still going forward, right?
The feeling is mutual.
Thank you, dear. All right. So thanks for tuning in to this this edition of In Conversation. And I hope that I don't know, just there was so much richness in what my colleague said. I hope you'll listen again. So thanks very much, everyone.